Welcome back, everyone. Today we are walking through Genesis chapter 36 through 42, which is one of the most dramatic stretches in all of Scripture. This section actually moves from genealogies to betrayal, to injustice, prison, to power, and finally to the beginning of reconciliation. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, welcome. Please be sure to subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out, and hit the notification bell so you will be notified each time I upload a new video. Each week we go through 7 chapters of Scripture. We started with Genesis 1, and you can use this Bible study a couple of ways. You can read the chapters before watching the video, or you could read one chapter, watch the video, read another chapter, watch the video. My goal in this is just to kind of bring Scripture to life and help you be able to digest it and understand it more easily. So let's go ahead and get started. At the center of today's video is a young man named Joseph, and we are starting with Genesis 36 today. Joseph's life shows us something powerful. So Joseph's life shows us that what people mean for harm, God can turn into purpose. Today we're going to see a divided family, a broken system of favoritism, years of suffering and silence, and the invisible hand of God moving the entire time. So let's get started right where our text starts, with a transition into the story of 2 brothers. So in Genesis 36, we see the line of Esau. That's just the genealogy of Esau. And sometimes at first glance, this chapter can just feel like a list of a lot of names, but it serves an important purpose. And we've talked a little about that. When we see these types of chapters, our first instinct is to want to just skip those, but they serve a purpose. So this chapter shows us 3 big things. First, God keeps his promises, even outside of a chosen line. So Esau was not the covenant heir, but God still blessed him with descendants who included chiefs and kings. Number 2, we can see nations are forming. Israel's story does not happen in isolation. Edom becomes a major neighboring nation that will interact and often conflict with Israel later on. And then number 3, we see the focus is beginning to shift. After showing Esau's line, the biblical narrative actually zooms back in on Jacob's family. This is the line through which God's covenant promises will actually unfold. And that's where the real drama begins. Now, in these upcoming chapters, for those of you who feel like reading the Old Testament is boring or not interesting, we have some major drama unfolding here. It is like a soap opera, or even an episode of Dateline. There's a lot of things to unpack here. So let's start with Genesis 37. This is where we meet Joseph. Joseph is 17 years old. His father loves him more than all of his other sons. He is the favored son. And this favoritism becomes visible when Joseph receives a special robe. It's actually a richly ornamented garment that signals status and honor. Now, Joseph's brothers don't just dislike him, they hate him. And then Joseph does something to make them hate him anymore. He begins to share these dreams he has started to have. So in one dream, Joseph tells his brothers that his brothers' sheaves bow to his sheaf. So in other words, he's saying, you all will bow to me. And in another dream, he says the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bow to him. So not only does he say, you will be bowing to me, but everyone else will be bowing to me as well. The meaning is obvious in these dreams. Joseph will ultimately be ruling over them. Instead of being humble about this, Joseph, he shares these dreams openly. He's probably a little conceited, and the resentment grows deeper. His brothers are not happy. Soon, an opportunity comes for his brothers to take care of Joseph. Joseph's brothers are tending flocks far away from home, and Jacob, the dad, sends Joseph to check on them. When they see him coming, they plot murder. But instead of killing him, they decide to throw him in a pit and then sell him to traveling traders who are actually headed to Egypt. So to cover all this up, they actually take this special robe that his dad had given him and they dip it into blood, and they make their father believe that Joseph is dead. You know, it probably looks like maybe a wild animal killed him, something like that. Jacob, the dad, is devastated. He mourns deeply. And Joseph, what happens to Joseph? Well, he is carried into slavery into a foreign land. But this is not the end of his story. This is actually the beginning of God positioning him. Now, in Genesis 38, we kind of shift gears. Their stories being interrupted by an account about Judah, one of the brothers, and something that happens within his family. So let's talk about Judah, the brother. Judah marries, and he has 3 sons. His oldest son marries someone named Tamar, but this oldest son dies. And according to the custom of that time period, the next son should provide offspring for the deceased brother's line. But guess what? He says he's not going to do that. He doesn't do what he needs to do to make that happen, and you can read the details about that. And guess what? He dies. So brother number 1 dies, brother number 2 dies. Judah promises his youngest son and says that will happen later on, but he never actually gives the youngest son to Tamar. And Tamar is angry. She sees this as an injustice, so she takes matters into her own hands. She, get this, she disguises herself and becomes pregnant by Judah, the dad, without him knowing it. And you'll have to read the chapter to figure out exactly how she does this. When Judah learns that Tamar is pregnant, he's angry. He demands punishment because he thinks, how did she get pregnant? I didn't give that 3rd son to her. Judah, she reveals evidence. However, this is a great story to go back and read. She reveals evidence that proves that Judah himself is the father of this child, and he declares, she is more righteous than I. So this chapter actually exposes moral failure. It exposes hypocrisy and broken responsibility. But it also shows something important. God works even through messy human situations when he is working to preserve the line through which future redemption will come. And that's super, super powerful. Moving on to Genesis 39, we go back to our friend Joseph. So Joseph arrives in Egypt and he's bought by someone by the name of Potiphar. Potiphar is an officer of Pharaoh. Even in slavery, something remarkable begins to happen. The Lord is with Joseph. Everything he manages prospers. Potiphar actually entrusts him with his entire household, but as often happens, success invites temptation. Potiphar's wife repeatedly tries to seduce Joseph. And he refuses. He doesn't want any part of that, not just out of loyalty to his master, but because he refuses to sin against God. One day, she grabs his garment, he runs off, leaves the garment behind, and she falsely accuses him. And guess what? Joseph is thrown into jail. He is actually imprisoned. Here's a powerful moment in Scripture. Joseph did the right thing. He resisted temptation, but now he's suffering for it. He is in prison. So an important lesson for us is faithfulness does not always produce immediate reward. Sometimes it leads to deeper hardship. But as we see the text repeat in this chapter, the Lord was with Joseph. All right, Genesis chapter 40, we see Joseph in prison, but guess what? Even in prison, Joseph continues to find favor with God. He is actually entrusted with some responsibility in prison. There are two royal officers who are in prison with him. One is Pharaoh's cupbearer, and the other is Pharaoh's baker. Now, they begin to have dreams, and they're kind of troubling dreams, and they start telling Joseph about these dreams. Joseph explains that dream interpretation belongs to God, and he interprets them for the cupbearer and the baker. And here's what Joseph tells them the dreams mean. He says, the cupbearer will be restored, the baker will be executed. So after he does this dream interpretation, he asks the cupbearer, he says, will you please remember me when you are restored or you are made free again? And guess what? The cupbearer goes free and he forgets about poor Joseph. Joseph remains in prison for 2 years. Can you imagine sitting in prison for 2 years? Silence, waiting, delay. Just another example of how God is still working, even when nothing seems to be happening. Now in Genesis 41, guess what? We see Pharaoh again, and he starts to have these dreams. We see this recurring theme of dreams in these chapters. So in these dreams that Pharaoh is having, there are 7 healthy cows that are devoured by 7 thin cows. There are also 7 full ears of grain that are swallowed by 7 thin ones. No one can figure out what these dreams mean. And then, ding, 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 the cupbearer who had forgotten Joseph remembers him. So he has them bring Joseph from prison to interpret these dreams for Pharaoh. Joseph is brought from prison, he's cleaned up, and he's presented to Pharaoh, and he gives first he gives credit to God, and he explains. Here's what they mean. 7 years of famine. Well, let me take that back. First, 7 years of abundance are coming, followed by 7 years of severe famine. Joseph advises Pharaoh to get prepared, store grain in those years of plenty, and Pharaoh sees this divine wisdom coming from Joseph, and he actually appoints him to be second in command all over Egypt, from prisoner to prime minister in a single day. Only God can do that. Joseph is actually given authority. He's given wealth, honor, and a new name. And more importantly, he is placed exactly where God needs him to be to preserve life. Now, our last chapter today is Genesis chapter 42. So we see the famine start. It begins to spread beyond Egypt into the land of Canaan. And Jacob, our first dad, sends his sons to Egypt to buy grain because of this severe famine. They come the brothers and stand before Egypt's ruler and bow. But guess what? They don't recognize Joseph, but he recognizes them. Uh-oh. The dreams from years earlier are now fulfilled. Remember the sheaves that would be bowing to him, he said, and that would be his brothers? It is now happening. So Joseph decides to test them, not for revenge, but to reveal their hearts. First, he accuses them of spying. He puts them in prison briefly, and he keeps Simeon, one of the brothers, while sending the other brothers home with grain. At one point, he secretly returns money in their sacks, and this sends them into a frenzy of fear and confusion. But when they return to their father, they recount everything. And Jacob, the dad, is completely devastated. He's afraid he is actually going to lose another son. Our story will pause here. We can see the tension rising. Reconciliation is not yet complete, but God's plan continues to move forward. So what do we learn from this powerful section? Wow, what a powerful section. So much happened, and we can see God's hand in all of it. So first thing we can learn is God is working even when it looks like chaos. Betrayal, injustice, and delay, none of these things stopped his plan. So when God has a plan, nothing can stop it. Number 2, integrity matters when no one else is watching. Joseph's private faithfulness prepared him for public leadership. Number 3, waiting, even though it's hard, is part of preparation. Prison was not wasted time. It was training, essentially. And number 4, God can redeem family brokenness. Reconciliation is coming, but transformation must happen first. 5th and finally, what people intend for evil, God can use for good. So these chapters aren't just history, they are hope. If you feel forgotten today, delayed, mistreated, or stuck in a season that makes no sense, Joseph's story is a great reminder that God is never absent. God is never late. God is always working behind the scenes, and the story, your story, isn't finished yet. Next time, we're going to see what happens when Joseph's brothers return to Egypt and how this path toward forgiveness begins. If this teaching helped you today, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs some encouragement today. Thank you so very much for watching. I'll see you next time.